Welcome to the Provenance Lab and this tutorial on linking provenance data. It's hard to believe given the wealth of information that already exists on the web, but more is being added each day. Like a trusted librarian, a search engine tries to draw out meaning from this information so as to suggest useful results. To facilitate this task, information must be linked, and by linking information we produce knowledge, or rather, linked data. When we look for an entity through a search engine, such as Paul Cézanne on Google, our trusted librarian suggests not only web pages related to our search, but also information linked to the entity we are looking for. Paul Cézanne is at once linked to his artworks, biographical information, and social networks, for example. But it doesn't stop there, because each of these aspects are in turn linked to other entities. So much so that when a researcher looks up Cézanne's painting Houses in Provence, they can end up reading about the toxicity of oil-based pigments used in Van Gogh's self-portrait, at which point an advert pops up for Winsor & Newton's latest set. Going down such a rabbit hole is in part thanks to how such knowledge is organized and modeled. It is essentially linked. And this is in turn thanks to the very man who built the World Wide Web. Let us introduce you to Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who invented linked data, and like anyone who invents things nowadays, starred in a TED Talk in which he basically explained how data is relationships. He then goes on to explain the 3 rules of linked data, which we're now going to try and summarize for you. The first rule is to identify every possible entity with a URI, which is short for Unique Resource Identifier. Let's take the following URI. It functions as an identifier for the artist Paul Cézanne, who famously said, "With an apple I will astonish Paris," and not some random French guy. The second rule then determines that when we look up a URI, we are met with an abundance of useful information related to it, including endless paintings of apples in varying stages of decomposition. And then comes the third rule, which brings us back to Sir Tim when he said, "Data is relationships." According to this rule, the abundance of information resulting from the URI Paul Cézanne is in turn linked to countless new entities. And this is how we can end up down the rabbit hole. So what about provenance-linked data then? We here at the Provenance Lab are producing linked data from provenance information. But what does that mean exactly? It means that every provenance event, including the information contained within it, from the parties involved to its location and time, are uniquely identified and linked. Let's take our previous example from the provenance of Houses in Provence. Not only can we create a URI for the event itself, but we can also create identifiers for the object, here Houses in Provence, the party involved, here the NGA, and the method of transfer, here a gift. And that's not all, but we can moreover link other entities and information to these URIs. Take the NGA, for example. We can link it to Washington, D.C., say, and to the opening hours of its archive, for those researchers of you who are watching. In doing so, we can effectively bring a network of otherwise dormant entities to life. And by that I mean life on the web. But why is this also important? Because it simply wouldn't be fair if such data were obscured, or if, to come back to our initial example, the world was deprived of Cézanne's apples. Which brings us to what a consortium of scientists and organizations have called the FAIR principles. According to these principles, provenance-linked data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. This means that such data is not only findable and easily accessible on the web, but is also combined with other data that can be reused time and again. And since provenance-linked data is fair, It means that we can ultimately analyze provenance information on a large scale, indeed across institutions, and forge new insights into cultural and social phenomena across time and space. Just think about what you could query with all that information. Which brings us to our final tutorial on why provenance data at the Provenance Lab.